there are 91 million, 6% of women in the world around 24 countries who still have absolutely no rights to an abortion. That seems strange in a world where most people seem to agree that abortion is a good thing. Just look at the United Nations stance on abortion. They say human rights bodies have provided clear guidance on the need to decriminalize abortion. Ensuring access to these services in accordance with human rights standards is part of a state's obligation to eliminate discrimination against women and to ensure women's rights to health as well as other fundamental human rights. This also means that there is international pressure for the countries that currently criminalize abortion to change their current legislation, which makes the resistance of these countries a bit confusing in a global perspective. Today, I'll explore the reasons that might influence the criminalization of this human right by looking at a country in the Caribbean called Dominican Republic, that regardless of the numerous attempts to change the legislation, continue to have a strong stance against abortion.
En el Congreso no tiene las tres causales archivadas, que en el Congreso no tiene las tres causales archivadas. Saca de abajo, mamá, sube la arriba. Saca de abajo, mamá, sube la arriba, mamá, pa' que la lean los congresistas, pa' que la lean los congresistas. Que en el Congreso no tiene las tres causales archivadas, que en el Congreso no tiene causales archivadas. Saca de abajo, sube la arriba, saca de abajo, sube la arriba.
First, we have to understand Dominican law, and for that, we need to look at El Código Penal Dominicano, or the Dominican Penal Code, in Article 317, which explicitly says, whoever directly causes or cooperates in causing the abortion of a pregnant woman, even if she consents to it, shall be punished by rigorous imprisonment. The same penalty shall be imposed on a woman who causes an abortion. But those who indirectly participate in the abortion are also punished. The same article later says, a term of imprisonment of 6 to 2 years shall be imposed on a person who has brought a pregnant woman into contact or communication with another person in order to cause her to have an abortion. It also states that physicians, surgeons, midwives, nurses, pharmacists, and other medical professionals who, abusing their profession, cause abortion or cooperate in it, shall be sentenced to 5 to 20 years of rigorous imprisonment if the abortion is carried out. Dominican prohibition is strict, similar to the other countries that criminalize abortion. After hearing this, you might think, the current law in the Dominican Republic sounds outrageous and archaic. And the reason for that, it's because the law was written in 1884. One might think that Dominicans are outraged by the current penal code, yet in a research by Instituto de Investigación Social para el Desarrollo, more than 66.64% of participants support the current legislation and believe that abortion should never be allowed, regardless of the circumstances of the pregnancy and the needs and wishes of the woman. More shockingly, 69.06% of women participants voted against any change to the current legislation, more than men, who mark at 63.78%. This is not to say that the Dominican Republic does not have a strong pro-abortion population. The same ISD research showed a 30.76% support for terminating pregnancy under certain circumstances, and a 2.42% support for terminating pregnancy under all circumstances. The most visual movement in favor of abortion in the Dominican Republic is Las Tres Causales, a social movement attempting to progress legislation and eventually empower Dominican women with the right to a safe abortion. They are doing this alongside the Dominican Medical Association, the National Nursing Association, and the National Association of Private Clinics. Their demands are simple. They wish to terminate pregnancy on 3 grounds: when the pregnancy is the result of sexual rape or incest, if the life of the woman is at risk, or when the fetus presents congenital malfunctions incompatible with life. And while abortion is still a crime, the group has achieved many things. For instance, their famous protests in front of the Palacio Nacional helped the demands of the movement reach the Chamber of Deputies in June 2021. The chamber later passed a drafted penal code that excused abortion in one of the 3 causes outlined by Las Tres Causales. And while a few months later, when the proposed penal code reached the Senate, the majority of senators chose to amend the law, keeping abortion a crime punishable for both women and doctors, This is still considered a big win for the movement, considering that they polarized the conversation around abortion so strongly it became eminent for the Congress to address. But to really understand what it's really socially, religiously, and politically keeping abortion criminalized, we need to look at the Roman Catholic religion. Precisely, we have to look at the impact of Roman Catholicism in legislation in the Dominican Republic. In 2012, more than 40% of people were practicing Roman Catholics, and 29% of Dominicans were non-practicing Roman Catholics, meaning that more than 69% of Dominicans consider themselves Roman Catholic. Not only that, but the Catholic religion has always had a significant influence in Dominican legislation, since the country's legal system does not uphold the idea of separation of church and state. The country's ban on abortion is simply an illustration of this influence. For example, the Catholic idea of conception is ingrained in the Dominican Constitution. Take a look at the right to life, Article 37 of the Constitution. The right to life is inviolable from conception to death. The death penalty may not be established, pronounced, nor applied in any case. An outright abortion ban is implied in the first clause of the article. If life is a right that begins at conception and it's unalienable, it is obvious from this semantics that the fetus has a right to life and that the fetus' life cannot ever be taken away. And many scholars have issues with this constitutional semantics. For instance, they believe that the fundamental rights of pregnant women are completely sacrificed under this legislation, assaulting the dignity of the woman and reducing them to mere vessels for unborn children. The issue is that many political figures in the Dominican Republic and the strong pro-life movement in the country continue to make the conversation about religion. A small number of political figures, though, are trying to move the conversation away from faith. Let's take a look at Senator Sraful's speech in front of the Senate back in 2021.
De la madre, también, pro vida, porque eso es lo que somos, defendemos la vida preexistente y la vida que está ya aquí. Y esto no es un cuestionamiento de fe, y no podemos entrar en un tema de fe porque aquí somos servidores públicos que garantizamos derechos a través de lo que mandan el ordenamiento y el rol constitucional que tenemos, independientemente de la fe que profesemos cada uno. Y cuando me hablan de defender la vida, yo soy madre y yo defiendo la vida. Como defiendo también el derecho de muchas mujeres a que puedan sobrevivir a tragedias y a violaciones de derechos fundamentales, como el derecho a su dignidad, como decía el senador Iván Lorenzo, que es un derecho fundamental, tan fundamental como el derecho a la vida. Y sí es verdad que el artículo 37 de la Constitución reconoce la vida desde la concepción, pero los que somos abogados sabemos que todos los derechos fundamentales tienen excepciones. Ese mismo artículo 37 tiene una excepción: la legítima defensa. El derecho a la vida consagrado desde la concepción termina en el momento en que la mía corre peligro frente a otro ser humano y yo actúo para proteger mi vida de otro adulto. Y eso lo sopesa un tribunal y es una atenuante al momento de juzgarme, porque estoy defendiendo mi vida. Y cuando hablamos en este país de 3 causales, no estamos hablando de aborto, porque se ha querido manipular mucho el tema. Estamos hablando de 3 excepciones, para que se contemplen en la normativa jurídica y las mujeres que no tienen voz, las pobres, las violadas, las que son víctimas de incesto, en una sociedad de desigualdad y exclusión social, donde hay una normalización de esa violencia, de ese abuso sexual del tío, del primo, del hermano, del padrastro, y sale embarazada, sea protegida por un sistema sanitario, si ella quiere. Si ella quiere. Porque 3 causales son 3 excepciones, no obligan a nadie. Y la criminalización de cualquier tipo de interrupción de gestación no ha detenido los abortos clandestinos en este país, que ocurren todos los días. Entonces, o salvamos a las mujeres de la clandestinidad a la que tienen que recurrir en materia de salud, o le decimos como Estado: yo, Sistema Sanitario de Salud Pública de Estado Dominicano, con las prerrogativas que tengo, voy a garantizar tu derecho a la vida sexual y reproductiva, a tu salud mental, psicológica, después que fuiste abusada sexualmente. Y te doy las herramientas en un sistema sanitario para poder hacerlo y que no tengas que recurrir a la clandestinidad. Si tú quieres, y si no, te protejo tu derecho. Es de eso que estamos hablando.
She felt the need to say that this is not about religion. This is not a question of faith, and proceeded to point out what abortion it's really about. She says these are not exceptions. The grounds that the three causales are trying to change, rape, mother at risk, and non-viable fetus, are common in our country. Let's talk about rape. The Attorney General's office reported that between January and October, they received 63,000 complaints of gender-based and intrafamiliar violence in the Dominican Republic and more than 6,300 complaints of sexual crimes. Now let's talk about the life and health of the mother at risk. The illegitimacy of abortion places Dominican women in a vulnerable position. In 2016, a report by the Committee of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights showed that abortion, 13%, is the third leading cause of maternal mortality in the Dominican Republic. But it doesn't end there. Research also showed in 2006 that Dominican Republic, Chile, Peru, and Egypt result in 10 to 15 women out of 1,000 women being hospitalized annually due to complications from abortion. Other researchers talk about the costs of treating medical complications from unsafe abortions and how it places a significant financial burden on the public healthcare system. The reality is, and let's conclude this whole video with this, the Catholic Church has a huge influence in legislation. They have a huge influence in the Dominican population, gender norms and social norms. And it's improbable that the legislation will change anytime soon. That's just how things are. But one thing that is certain is that the fight is still going on. No one's giving up. People want the right to an abortion and they're fighting for it in the streets with politicians, with the help of international and national organizations. It's important for politicians also to recognize, and for you guys to recognize, that abortions are killing people currently in the Dominican Republic, because the legislation is making clandestine abortions the only option, making them unstandardized and unsafe. There's hundreds of women that could be here today that are not because of the current state of the legislation. And while we talk about life and while we talk about abortion as murder, we can talk about the illegality of abortion, the criminalization of abortion as murder as well. Most people in the Dominican Republic don't see value in changing the current legislation, which is kind of sad. But it is something that people are fighting against. It's norms and ideas and notions that people are fighting against in the Dominican Republic. Even if it's just a 30%, that 30% tomorrow can turn into 50%. And that 50% can get into Parliament one day, into Congress one day, and change legislation. And I'm hopeful of that, and I will always be hopeful of that. And I wanted to close with that. Things are moving in the Dominican Republic. It's just taking us a little longer, but it's gonna change one day, and I know it. I know things are gonna get better. I know unsafe abortions will end in the Dominican Republic one day, and I hope I'm here to see it.